You know, one of the best things about the Sonic franchise is likely the fact that it can tell all sorts of stories. You have the classic games that for the most part had small stories relegated to their manuals. Then you have Sonic Heroes, which had a fun, light-hearted story that didn't take itself seriously. And on the other hand, you have games like Silver The Hedgehog, with a very dark and gritty story that's quite ambitious in the breadth it's trying to cover. But what sets the good adaptations of a story for Sonic from the bad ones is if they can feel true to the cast. There'll be exceptions to this, such as the storybook games, where everyone that isn't Sonic is supposed to be a character, but outside of circumstances like that, as long as the story keeps the characters reasonable to the core of their characterization, then it should be a good story. Naturally though, you're not always going to expect what kind of story you stumble across. And one day, when I was browsing the internet trying to manage one of my recent uploads, I came across a rather interesting depiction of Sonic the Hedgehog. A version where he was a spirit. He had strange jewelry on, he looked kind of dead. This was on the Twitter page of Evan Stanley, who is one of the artists and writers at IDW Sonic Comics. So I just thought this might have been a nice spin-off drawing, not really important to anything, and didn't think much of it. But then I started to see other drawings pop up on my Twitter timeline, such as Blaze and Silver bearing scars, and I remember thinking to myself, scars? What's happened to Silver and Blaze? And is Sonic's dead? Is this all the same thing? All this is to say, I ended up looking into this, and it turns out that these art pieces were actually related to a fan comic series created none other than by Evan. Now, I was familiar with Evan purely from IDW Sonic Comics and nothing else, so it was to my great surprise to find out that there was actually an entire fan comic that had been worked on long before they joined IDW, and even would be continued to be added to once they had joined officially. And it was called Ghosts of the Future. Once I discovered this historic tome of a future that may have come to pass, I ended up delving right into it, reading the whole thing up to its current point of completion. And so now I'm going to give you a little bit of a review, a little bit of a sales pitch, as it were. If you're in the mood for a slightly different than usual Sonic tale, this could be the one for you. The main premise for this tale is that it focuses on Silver the Hedgehog in the future. There isn't any Silver time traveling backwards. This is him in his future, and we see how he handles strange scenarios that take place around him that cause him to have to become a hero, but under completely different circumstances to how it happened in games like Sonic 06. Whilst he is the main character, you will still be seeing quite a bit of the blue blur Sonic the Hedgehog, who is basically the second main character of the story. At some points he takes more of a focus, and then in other parts he fades back a little to give Silver his time to shine. In a way, it's a bit like Sally and Sonic from SatAM, where Sonic was the main character, but there were a fair few times where Sally would have some more prominence over Sonic, but they were both present the whole way through. They're not the only recognisable characters that you'll come across in this tale, but a lot of them are slightly different than what you might be used to. Since this does take place in the future, most of the cast are dead, some for less than natural causes, but either way, most of them are dead. So what we have are descendants of, or distant relatives, or strange versions of characters from the main timeline. As an example, Blaze the Cat obviously is part of the tale and has a sizable role, but she is not the princess of the Soul Dimension. She comes from Silver's future, and she has no connection to a different space or time, and she does have her fire powers, but she doesn't really come into them initially at the start of the story. We also get to see her father figure, and it turns out Blaze may or may not be the descendant of a specific purple cat we are also familiar with. But, like I was saying at the start, just because the circumstances are different, it doesn't mean that Blaze has been assassinated as a character. She still behaves in a way very similar to the normal Blaze, just with slight alterations that make sense for the new backstory she has this time around. But what is the tale actually about? Well, this is where it can get a little bit dark for some people. Basically, the story of Ghosts of the Future is about a timeline where the Sonic heroes were killed, not by Eggman, by Shadow, under the influence of the Doctor, but Shadow's hands killed them all. Regardless, if Shadow has murdered all the characters, how is there a story that involves Sonic? Well, that's why the artwork showed him as a ghost. Sonic dies, but is brought back, kind of, through the powers of the Chaos Emeralds. And he becomes a guardian of sorts, tasked with finding a suitable hero to take the mantle and responsibility of using the Chaos Emeralds to restore the harmony of the universe, or something like that. Eventually, he comes across Silver many years in the future and decides that he is the chosen one for this task. Despite Sonic's misfortune, he still has his energetic attitude and point of view, but there is a tinge of angst and regret that highlights his behaviour and causes him to act slightly differently in specific circumstances, but in a way that is believable based on what has happened to him and his friends. Silver is our reluctant protagonist though, and initially doesn't really want to have anything to do with the shenanigans Sonic brings into his life, but Sonic being Sonic wasn't going to take no for an answer, so he ends up being brought along anyway. And you get to see how that dynamic evolves and develops over time. Of course, it's not going to be a walk in the park. Forces old and new awaken to Silver's actions and begin to hunt him and Sonic down, making their lives a whole lot more difficult. And then some ghosts of the past end up interfering with the whole formula as well, making for very interesting conflicts if you're into the way characters interact with one another. Now, my main piece of criticism for this work is that at numerous points in the comic, it can become rather unclear how much time is supposed to have passed between pages, and sometimes this left me rather confused and out of sync with the characters, who obviously understood what was happening. I was not sure if it was only a small amount of time or if a larger gap had taken place. Sometimes you are told, oh, this is a while later, but yeah, it was consistent enough to where that's my main criticism. Sometimes it's hard to tell how much time is passing in universe. It's not a deal breaker, obviously I still got through it, and maybe it was just me. I just feel like there could have been some more clarification at certain points of the story. If you keep reading on, you'll probably piece it together eventually, but don't be surprised if you do get stumped on a couple points here and there. The other major thing that stood out to me as a problem with the story itself is that the villain that they were building up to become the sort of main antagonist, after being introduced, made a couple impactful decisions, but then vanished from the plot and never showed up again beyond a certain point, without any sort of explanation as to why this has happened. Maybe there was a change in direction behind the scenes, or perhaps it was something that was just going to come back later as a surprise, but with what we have so far, it really does seem like this important character stopped showing up with no explanation. It's an interesting read nonetheless, and aside from the reading aspect, another fun part to reading the comic is watching how the art progresses. As I said, this was worked on for a long time. A really long time. You can see the dates of when the pages were posted. And so watching the art style develop as you read along and improve and get tweaked is really interesting if you're into comics or if you just like looking at drawings. And since I wasn't familiar with the more recent work and thus art style Evan, watching it become progressively more like the style I recognise was rather entertaining. Overall, I would recommend you give it a read if you're looking for a new story with the Sonic cast. It is free after all, and made from a passionate fan. but I should add the story is currently incomplete. Unfortunately, life is busy and people need to earn money, so fan projects usually either get shelved or cancelled. Officially, as far as I'm aware, the story isn't cancelled, it's just on hold for now. So if you're someone who doesn't like reading or watching something until it's finished, then yeah, probably this is not the time for you to jump in. If that doesn't bother you though, and there is a lot already there, go for it. You can find it on their DeviantArt page, which is also on their Twitter page. Have a read. Let me know if you enjoy it. Let Evan know, I'm sure they'll appreciate that. It's a very interesting, if sometimes dark, take on the Sonic universe.
Which is fine by me.
Anyway, that's all I had to say on that topic. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I've not really talked about the comics at all on this channel really, so this is the first of a few I have planned in the future. If you liked this video and want to see more like it, please leave a like, comment and subscribe to let me know that this is what you want to see. I hope you have a great day and to see you next time. This is the Mighty Emperor signing off.